Hello, this is Kyou of Kyou System. So, I had a moment when I was driving just recently, and specifically, I was driving up the main road that leads away from where I'm living, and this road there's like an intersection between this road and another one at the top of this large hill. And both of the roads are pretty busy. They see a lot of traffic pretty much all throughout the day. So if you are unfortunate enough to not get the green light when you arrive at the intersection, you usually end up having to sit there for a minute or two for the lights to cycle. And on this particular afternoon, I'd driven up there and I had missed the light, so I had to sit there and wait. And I was at the front of the line, so there weren't any cars in front of me. And the thing about this hill is that it's very steep, so it crests and then it just descends very quickly. So when you're at the top of it, you have a pretty wide, unobstructed view of not just the surrounding buildings and the like, but also of the horizon. And as I was sitting there, I was struck by this view of a massive, towering storm system off in the distance. And I've talked in the past about the sort of sense of reverence and awe that I have around thunderstorms and storm systems in general. Certainly when I was in the middle of one, in the middle of a particularly severe one at that. In the incident that I talked about in the first episode that I did, I was pretty humbled by it, suffice it to say. In this case, it was very far off in the distance, and these massive, piles of just these massive pillars, I should say, of these cumulonimbus clouds, but it wasn't just like them against like a blue sky. It was the sort of sky you might see where it's like we have these brilliant gray-white clouds that are thrown into contrast with light striking them, and against the backdrop of darker gray clouds that are further in the distance, that don't have the same sort of distinct form to them, giving it quite the striking backdrop, and throwing the larger cumulonimbus clouds into stark relief. And again, the only way I could think of to describe it at the moment was they were just breathtaking. It was a breathtakingly magnificent view. And more than that, though, there was another feeling that I had while I was looking at it, which is what I want to talk about in particular. And it was this feeling of, I want to say it's nostalgia. And it's not like, okay. So normally when people think of nostalgia, it's this, it's usually in relation to things like old TV shows, or especially old video games, things that when you enjoyed it when you were a kid, and then you're going back and re-experiencing it. And, that is definitely, the normal type of nostalgia, and I've had more than my fair share of that kind of experience. This is different. It's like, I'm not even sure really how to describe it. It's so it's like, because okay, so imagine like the color red, right? So you can have, obviously red is red, but you can have shades of red that are very bright, very intense, very eye-catching. And then you can have reds that are much darker, much dull, very dull, kind of hard to see. Like the difference between, like a bright red of like a stoplight versus something like, a dull, like an apple that's starting to get brown a little bit. They're very distinct. And I suppose with this feeling of nostalgia, it's like most of the nostalgia that I would experience from, like, if I revisited some games on the Nintendo 64 or something, because that's what I played when I was a kid. It probably shows my age, but nevertheless, it would be a very it's like I feel the nostalgia, but it's a very dull sort of feeling. Whereas the nostalgia that I had when I was looking at this massive storm system in the distance was very, very, very bright, very vibrant, very powerful, and just mixed with, it felt like it was, kind of like the part that I could understand of like a larger sort of mental feeling or impression, and like the other parts I'm not really sure how to describe, but they were so vague and distant that it was, trying to put it in it. Even if I could try to describe it in words, it was so vague that I don't know that it would kind of be like a wasted effort, perhaps. But this is certainly not the first time that I felt this, right? Because there have been other times in the past, and other times I say in the past like this is some distant thing. Sometimes even just within the other occasions within the past few days, and then not necessarily just recently, but like just kind of on and off as I see things that trigger it, which is not all that infrequently, is the point I'm trying to make. But to give another example, it's like so I was going down a road a few days, I should say maybe probably closer to like a week or two before that point, before the occasion I was talking about where I was looking at that storm system, and there was this sort of office building, I think it was, and it was this small, squat brick structure, and it was, I guess they had bought the whatever management company or the builders that had put this little office complex together, or this office building. I think it was like two or three buildings like this that were kind of clustered together that were like leased out by different companies, and whoever had done it, they made these short, squat little brick buildings, and there's like just forest on the other side, undeveloped land pretty much. And I was struck in particular by this one of the buildings. It was right nestled up against the edge of the forest pretty much, and it was like a very, like, the whole scene was like this small brick building that was like surrounded by trees, and against a sky that was kind of cloudy. It wasn't like stormy like the other occasion, but it was sort of a cloudy, more closer to overcast kind of day. And I was also struck with this profound feeling of nostalgia, and and just thinking back on these occasions and on the other ones where I've had these feelings, like just this weekend, even when I went, I was driving through a neighborhood I'd never been through before, and it was very, very heavily wooded. Because some neighborhoods, it's like a standard suburb. They've cut down most of the trees. It's, not super memorable or anything like that. It certainly doesn't trigger anything in me. But then there are other neighborhoods where they're like almost like in the middle of a forest, it feels like, where there are like a dozen trees in every single house's yard. And certainly there are very beautiful neighborhoods, and I would like to live in one myself. But it also triggered the same feeling of nostalgia. And other neighborhoods I've been in the past where there were trees like that all over the place had a similar feeling. Even though growing up, I have never lived in any house or neighborhood like that at all. And I didn't go over to friends' houses that were in neighborhoods like that, nothing of that sort. So it's just difficult to sort of place where these feelings are coming from. It's not the sort of thing where I can easily think of memories that they'll be like, oh yeah, this reminds me of this time when I went over to so-and-so's house and it was always a lot of fun, or when I went over to this relative's house and, it was a really comfortable time in my past or whatever. Nothing like that at all. And yet the feeling is so powerful, and it's not just something I could just dismiss as like a daydream. And I guess maybe it was like things that I've seen in dreams, perhaps. Because certainly, as I talked about in another episode, I have a lot of dreams that involve these landscapes where it's like, the skies are overcast and all the greenery and wildlife is overgrown. And things like that. So it's like it kind of makes sense where, okay, maybe it's like I had dreams and I'm feeling nostalgic for things I saw in the dream. I couldn't say, honestly. And I feel like certainly I don't want to start delving into things like, well, maybe it's from like memories of a past life or whatever, because, that's a whole different issue entirely, and not something I'm really certainly nothing I'm going to wade into here, but not something I put a lot of stock in personally, but regardless, it's not something that I can just dismiss because it has happened so consistently and over so many different periods of my life, even though, and to this day, after all these years of thinking about it and wondering about it, I've not been able to come up with any kind of convincing answer for not just for why I feel it and why I feel nostalgia in particular at these sites, but why it's so powerful, especially. And if you're familiar with Remembrance, I certainly wrote about it in there as well. And, unlike a lot of the other character arcs and plot arcs in Remembrance, I never really came up with a conclusion for that one. That was supposed to be the tie-in to Permanence and is going to be something that I try to explore a little more. But I don't know. It's this misplaced feeling of nostalgia, or it's like I see these things and it feels like, it's like it reminds me of home, yet it is not a home that I think I have ever known or that I can ever put where I can point out at what point I was at this place or any place like that. I don't know. It's very, very mysterious sort of thing, and nothing I've read has really gotten anything close to answering it. Nothing that I don't know if anyone else has experienced anything similar to this. Honestly, I couldn't say. It's not really something that I usually talk about in the first place, so I suppose that maybe other people have known and they just haven't shared because I didn't ask. Who knows, right? But nonetheless, yeah. And again, it certainly has shown up in a lot of my works, like for instance in Permanence. In addition to talking about it very directly in Remembrance, less intentionally so with Permanence when I designed the Televator, or really before, like a while before that, when I wrote the story draft that I have largely cannibalized for writing at least the initial portions of Permanence. It was like the description of like the general design of the Televator, this squat brick building that has these, it's a dusty brick. There's not anything else near, like really around it. Has these old street lights that are, like the pole is like a weathered green color from the wood being treated. Has a kind of a dull buzz to it. The light bulbs are old and yellowed. And it's surrounded by like a dense forest sort of encroaching on all angles. And it's just this dirty little brick building, and there's nothing inside of it. It's just nothing but, concrete on the inside and, cheap fluorescent lights that buzz rather loudly. And so it's just this vivid image in my mind. And when I'm not really sure where it came from. I kind of have vague. It's like it seems like maybe something I might have seen once when I was younger, but it doesn't. It was never anything where I spent a lot of time around it, or anything where I might have thought, this was like a place that was really important to me, or anything like that. And yet it's so vividly there, and there are lots and lots of images that I have like that in my mind that I suppose I will talk about in future episodes, since this one has gotten rather long. But all of them have this common theme of like a misplaced sense of nostalgia, and I honestly don't know what to think of it. But in any case, I hope you enjoyed hearing me talk about it, and I hope you are doing well and that you have a good rest of your day or evening. Take care.